Thanks for joining us tonight. We've got a good one. This was actually sparked by a discussion amongst the coaches and around some open water, more specific open water skills and building speed in a competitive open water environment. And I know that John's sessions here are always perennial favorites for athletes. We get a ton of people watching afterwards and a ton of people joining up here live. So I'm going to turn it over to him because I know he's got several topics to cover. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand the mic over to the expert to talk about all things open water swim.
Thank you, Tiger. So yeah, as Tiger mentioned, this actually came about. We were on a kind of a coaching call, which we do frequently. And one of the coaches, who will remain nameless, I think piped up and said something along the lines of, everybody should be drafting. And I was like, well, I mean, yes and no. And that was the simple thing, is we started with drafting, and we 20 minutes later realized we've been discussing drafting and all the idiosyncrasies around that, and how convoluted that can be. And it's no clear answer. And what we kind of came up with from that was it's an open water specific skill that is developed. And that kind of led to the idea of this, of like, yes, there are actually quite a few skills that are for open water swimming specifically. And so that's what we're going to kind of dive into tonight. And I'm sure this will expand as we get going. I know Tiger and I just, going back and forth between this call is like, you know what, I've got something else I want to mention tonight too. So it's going to be that kind of conversation where we're going to flow with it. But kind of the big highlights are, as I was thinking about this in the weeks prepping for it, and what are some of those skills that we want to dial in on for us as triathletes and people that are racing, and what's going to be, useful for you. What we kind of started with obviously was drafting. That is a big one we're going to kind of touch on, and how you do it, when you do it, what's the benefit from it, when is it not a benefit, and who is it right for. Sighting, we'll certainly touch on sighting. We always touch on sighting, and it's such an important part of open water swimming. It's integral to what we're doing when we're out there, and it kind of ties into to drafting a little bit. We're also going to touch on race entries and race exits. The entries are a little bit different in that these days, a lot of times you've kind of got a ramp that you kind of will go down into, but what are we going to do if there's high surf at Oceanside or something like that? A swim exit when you're swimming, and when do you stop? Do you dolphin dive? Where do you end up running out of the water? The other thing that I want to touch on too is, I've yet to, I guess some of these down current swims that say I'd yet to see a swim without a turn buoy. Even the downriver ones will have a buoy to swim in, but how do you navigate that? How do you navigate getting around a buoy? And I think there are some differences. Are you a strong swimmer? Are you a weaker swimmer? Are you like Chris Hughes, you want to get in there and rough it up with people on the swim? Or do you just like, I'm going to stick to the outside and give myself a little bit of space? So what's the best approach to that based on the type of swimmer you are? And we were chatting about downriver swims and currents as this call got started. And how do you manage a current, whether it's downriver, in across current, or even if you end up having to swim into a current. I know there have been races in the past, I think those have kind of been changed, where you would have a section where you were swimming up against the current and you would have to then turn and then maybe ride with it. But we're going to touch on all of these. Obviously, as questions come up, drop them into the chat. Sometimes it's easier if it's relevant to the topic we're on at the time, then I can just jump onto it, or we can just recap on some things on the end. But, I figured we're going to get started kind of right where this whole topic came up, and that was drafting. And you hear that a lot with open water swimming, and it's finding feet and following on to that. And is there a benefit to it? And how to do it. And I think the quick answer is there a benefit to drafting? Yes, absolutely. And it's one of those where growing up as a swimmer, when you're tucked in behind someone's feet, you can feel it, and you can just tell that you're getting that pull. Your efficiency is going to go way up. Your speed is going to be up, and your effort level is going to drop on that as you drop into that. But there is a way to do it, and there's a time to do it. Now, with drafting, what's going to happen is when you pull in, let's say, behind someone's feet, and that's kind of the optimal spot would be literally right on someone's foot. So if this is a foot and this is a hand, you're almost just touching their foot, and you're kind of living right in this zone right here off their feet. Now you're going to lose that as you get maybe 2 feet back from there. that's where you're going to be out of that. And you're going to end up fighting against their wake at that point as they come. Instead of having that wake pull you along behind them, it's going to be pushing you back. So you need to be able to maintain that short distance right in someone's feet. Another good spot to draft is to get right up onto somebody's hip. And so if you're kind of right up swimming right at about that hip level, if you think about your head or your hands kind of being right at that hip level and literally kind of almost, as Days of Thunder said, rubbing is racing, you're kind of right in there rubbing with people as you go a little bit. That gets a little tricky if you're right next to somebody. Sometimes if you're rubbing too much, you're going to hit and it's going to throw your stroke off a little. And so that's why I find if you are drafting, maybe you're in a situation where you can get behind next to somebody, but ideally you're settling in behind someone. Now, for a stronger swimmer, this is going to be a little bit easier to do. And I say that because a stronger swimmer is going to have a better sense of pacing, a better sense of that effort they're putting out, and a better sense of speed. And so I could get behind somebody and be swimming and be like, you know what, I can tell by what's happening here that this is actually a slower pace than I want to be swimming. So this isn't working for me. Yes, I'm saving energy, but I'm going slower than I need to. And I would pull out and go and maybe find another set of feet. Now, if you're newer to swimming and newer to pacing, if you're one of those people that's like, I go to the pool and I do 70% and I do 80% and I do 90%, it's all kind of the same. You have a hard time kind of gauging that. That's where that becomes tricky. Because if you're sitting on someone's feet and who knows, maybe that person surged by you and you're like, great, I'm going to sit on their feet. And then they just slow right back down again. If you don't have that sense of pacing, you're not going to really get a full understanding if they're slowing down. And you might be like, this race was great. I drafted right off that person the whole time. Then you get out and you see your time and you're just kind of baffled that it was that slow because you were drafting, but you're only as fast as the person you're drafting off of at the end of the day. So it takes that awareness and it takes that understanding as you go, as you're on someone's feet. Is this benefiting me? Am I actually swimming at a pace I want to maintain, or do I need to pull off? And I think that's the other thing with pacing too, is it isn't simply finding feet and sticking to those feet. Yeah, maybe that might work every once in a while. But again, people are going to slow down. People are going to speed up. People might swim off course. And so you might need to be jumping ship, if you will, and finding different sets of feet if you're maybe one of those more mid-pack swimmers and you have that option of a lot of people being around you. And I think the other side with that too is you just never know whose feet you're on. You don't know how strong of a swimmer they are. You don't know how well of a pacer they are. You're kind of putting a lot of your eggs in someone else's basket. And that's not always the right way to go about it. So there is kind of a intelligence level as a swimmer that needs to be attained to be able to kind of flow through that and do that. Now, I mentioned earlier too, the other side of that is someone might start to swim a kind of a poor course, or maybe swim off course. And anyone who's been on this call and heard me talk about drafting or sighting has always heard me tell the story of a former Purple Patch coach who's not with us. And it's not Nancy who came back, it's someone else, don't worry. And we were doing a main race, and it was a half distance and Olympic distance. And the Olympic distance went out to the first buoy, turned, the half distance went out to the second buoy and turned. And this coach followed some feet right behind a really strong swimmer. They were the first two swimmers, and that guy took a left at the Olympic distance, and they were in the 70.3, and they were about 2 minutes into that turn before a kayaker was able to come down and get them and send them back out the other way. So ended up losing quite a bit of time because of that. And it's one of the things I like to say is you're not necessarily buoys, but following flags, not feet. So yeah, you're following those feet, but you still have that buoy. You need to know where you're going and where you're heading. And so it's having that awareness of, am I still on course? So it's not simply settling in behind someone and being like, I'm here, I'm set, I'm going to go with this race. You're thinking about a lot of things as you're doing that. Again, it's pace, it's effort, what's direction, where's it going? And you need to have that awareness and still be sighting and still be looking to make sure you're swimming on that right course. So there's some kind of, when someone says, should I be drafting? It's maybe. And there's a lot that goes into that, and we can kind of check off those boxes. So I think, generally speaking, I think for the average triathlete, I almost say you're a little bit better just focusing on what you need to do, right? We always say, swim your own race, run your own race, ride your own race, whatever it is. You know your effort levels, you know what to do. You've dialed that in, you're able to do it. Now, you're going in, you're swimming your straight line, you've got your tempo, you've got your effort, you've got that set in, you're sighting well. If you so happen to find that opportunity to draft off somebody, I think you could try to take it. But generally speaking, I would just say focus on what you need to do and where you're going in your race and execute that well, as opposed to adding that worry of finding someone else's feet. And like any skill that we're going to be talking about tonight, it's something that, you get better at. It's an acquired skill. You need to practice this. And so now, if you have the opportunity to be swimming with a group in open water, this is something you can practice with your group. Even my group, we do it just because, we don't want to work too hard. We want other people to do the work. We'll do what's called a pace line, and we'll line up with however many people we have swimming in the open water, and you swim one person behind the other, behind the other, behind the other, and you're hitting feet in front of you, and you've got someone hitting feet behind you. But I'll tell you, you've never swum easier than when you're in the middle of one of those pace lines, and everyone is just swimming right along at the same pace and the same effort. But while you're doing that, you're practicing that feel of being behind someone. Are they still swimming straight? In my group, I've had times where someone all of a sudden just takes a weird right turn, and you have to hit them on the feet and be like, where are you going? And kind of realign that a little bit. But you're practicing that, and you're getting an idea of what that feels like. And you're also understanding where is that zone, getting a feel for that. What did I say? About 2 feet behind someone's feet, of what does that feel like, and how do I settle into that spot? And you can feel when you come out of the draft zone and when you're in the draft zone. But again, like anything, that just takes practice and understanding as you go through it. And so that's kind of my recommendations for drafting. Yes, it is super beneficial if you're have the swimming intelligence around that. You're able to practice it and you're able to get into it. But if you are able to do those things, it is an advantageous skill to learn for open water. So not a clear-cut answer there, but I'm just kind of giving you the high level on what drafting is, how to do it, and when's it going to work for you, if it is going to work for you. But again, I'll recap real quick. I think for the average triathlete, focus on what you've got going on, focus on your race. If the opportunity arises and it's something you've practiced, go for it. But for most people, I think you're better off just swimming your own race, because you understand your effort level, you understand your pace, your own rhythm. You can trust your own sighting, hopefully, and go from there. So that's kind of the quick overview there on drafting. And again, if any questions come up on this, drop them in. We can come back to it and go over that as well. Now, again, part of that I mentioned with drafting, and this is something that we talk about all the time, and so I'm not going to spend too much time on this topic, but the idea of sighting. And real quick, I'm sorry, I'm going to rewind just a little bit to drafting. We talked about practicing it in open water. It is something you can practice in the pool as well. It makes it a little more difficult with flip turns and things like that, but same idea, swimming right on someone's feet and getting an idea of that feeling and where it is. That is something that you could do in a pool with a group or with a partner, whoever it may be. Anyone that's been to a Purple Patch camp, we've done those pace lines in the camp before. So we do it in the pool as well. So yes, you can do that in the pool. Anyway, moving on, sighting, going into that. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. This is something that we talk about a lot whenever we do one of these swim office hours. But sighting is obviously integral to open water swimming. You got to see where you're going. You've got to be able to swim straight, or you're just adding time to what you're doing. Now, real quick, when we talk about sighting, what we want to do is integrate that sighting into a breath. And so the mistake that we see a lot, you see it up here, is if you've got someone swimming along, and if you're just lifting your head up and then putting your head straight back down, that is one of the bigger mistakes that we can make. By doing that, by just putting your head down this way, you're actually creating a mini wave, a little bit of a wave that's going to be pushing water forward, which means it's pushing you backwards a little bit. So you're almost putting on the brakes every time you just put your head straight down in front of you. And so we want to get a little more aerodynamic with it in a sense and integrate that into a breath. Now, as we're swimming along, and it's going to take me a minute here to find my own rhythm because I always forget as I'm doing it on dry land. So let's say I breathe to my left. What I'm going to be doing as I go through that stroke is, if I'm breathing to the left, I'm going to be utilizing my left hand. And so as I go through, this left hand's going to enter. And as it enters, instead of dropping down into my catch right through here, I'm going to just press down ever so slightly towards the bottom. Now, if anyone, I think there's a few people on here who have done my swim analysis with me. If you are pressing down, that means your body is going up. So when we're talking about swim efficiency, generally speaking, that's not good, because we want to be moving forwards, not up and down. And so what we try to do is get water and move water backwards. Now, the caveat to that is when we're sighting, we do want to come up because we want to lift our body up just enough to be able to get our eyes out of the water and see where we're going. So as I'm going, that left hand is going to push down slightly. And for me, I also give myself just a little bit of an extra kick. And so it's almost just like a little pop. And so that press down and that kick, and you come up and you're not lifting your head all the way out of the water. We don't want to go pure alligator eyes with just half. Let's say right about nose level, because that gets my eyes clearly out of the water so I can see where I'm going without lifting up too high. Because the higher I come up, the lower my lower half is going to get and create drag. So we're just trying to pop that head up just enough to be able to see what we're sighting. And so again, I'm going to go through this again, press up. And then as we come through that stroke, you're coming into that breath on the side. And then you're falling right back into that rhythm. Now, the other thing I talk a lot about with open water swimming is rhythm. And you find that rhythm, and that's what you want to settle into as you're going. Now, that sight is going to throw off your rhythm a little bit. Some might say, I almost like to think of it as it's part of your rhythm. So I recommend sighting every 3 to 5 strokes. So you might do something where you go 1, 2, 3 sight, 1, 2, 3 sight, or 5. But when you take that sight and you look up, you're going to have a little bit of a gallop, meaning you're going to kind of rush through that stroke a little bit to catch up. Your rhythm is going to change just slightly as you go through that. And that's okay, as long as you're not slipping through the water too much on that. So expect that and kind of fall into that rhythm. And so some people will be like, oh, I sight when I need to. Yes, for some people that works, but for other people, if you're doing it every 3, if you're doing it every 5, you're finding the rhythm of that again, because open water swimming, so much about rhythm. If it's every 3, it can be expected to kind of come up into that sight and go through it. And so just really trying to integrate that well, not come too high out of the water, just enough, and really integrating it into the breath. And that can get really tricky for some people. That integration, which is why we have so much sighting right now this time of year in the pool sessions that we're doing, because that is an easy skill to practice in the pool. But when we're practicing in a pool, we're practicing the motion, we're practicing how that works, we're practicing the rhythm, where it's pretty easy to sight when you're in a pool and you've got 2 lane lines and a black line right in the middle. So the open water is where you're going to practice that again. But as you're integrating that, you're practicing it by actually sighting and seeing what you're sighting off of. Now, obviously, when we're in a race, the easiest thing to sight off of is the buoy in front of you. Sometimes that's not really an option. I think when I put this reminder in the Facebook group, Jeff Lipschultz popped in and said, hey, what if the sun's right in front of me? And every time I lift my head, the sun's in my eyes. That happens. And so with that, now what we're doing is we're using kind of our peripheral and other things that are around. So when I'm swimming and I'm sighting and there's buoys, I'm sighting on that buoy, on that buoy, on that buoy. Now, if I can't see that buoy, then I'm sighting off of something else. So I say sighting on the buoy because I'm looking at it and I'm swimming to that buoy. Now, if I can't see that buoy, but you know what, there's something on the shore, it's a tree line, it's a building, or there's something just off to the side, maybe, again, a big tree, a big building, a tent at the finish line, whatever it may be. Now I'm swimming off of that, meaning I can see it and I'm swimming in relation to it. So I know that I need to be going this way. I know that building is there. So when I go up and I sight and I see that over there, I need to adjust myself just so. Now that gets tricky because you're not swimming right towards that thing, you're using it in relation to where you are. And that certainly is an open water acquired skill. Can't practice that as well in the pool. That's something you need to get out into the open water and make an effort to practice with and say, I want to swim this way, but I'm going to sight off this thing that's off to the side so I can practice using something in my peripheral or off to the side to swim in a different line. And so that's a whole nother kind of acquired skill on its own, is that idea of using those other things around you to sight. And so, as I said, that's kind of the quick overview, just the reminder on the sighting stuff. I don't want to spend too much time on that because it is something that, we have a lot of education on. We talk a lot about it, but happy to answer any other questions on that should they come up as we go through this. Now, we've kind of talked about some tactics within the race as far as sighting, as far as drafting. Another big tactic within the race are those buoy turns. We get to a buoy, usually it's a 90-degree turn. Sometimes you'll see maybe a 180, but I'd say it's usually about a 90-degree turn as you're going around the buoy. Now, the fastest, most efficient way is to swim right at that buoy and get right around it. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. And again, this is for someone who is comfortable being kind of in the mix, because anytime you can see people swimming around a buoy, anytime you get to that buoy, you're going to see everybody kind of come together into a group to get around it. And so all of a sudden you've been in clean water, you're going around that buoy, now you're starting to get knocked, you're starting getting hit a little bit. So you need to be comfortable with that if you're going to hug that buoy tight. And, I've seen some people that it works well. You can come right into that buoy, and if the buoy's right up here on my right, as I'm swimming into it, I can get onto that and just do a couple of big left turns and really turn my body to get around that. And that's the quickest, easiest, or I'd say the easiest way, just to go in, get around, get through that buoy. If you really wanted to get tricky, you've probably seen some people that will throw in almost like a backstroke kind of stroke into this. And this is something where I'm going to entertain you with it. If you're a strong swimmer, a comfortable swimmer, something you have an opportunity to practice, you can give this a try and see how it goes. And we've tried it at some of the camps. But it's essentially, if anyone's got kids that swim, or if you swim when you were a kid, we would do the corkscrew drill, which was fun, which was, you do a freestyle stroke and you do a backstroke, and you do a freestyle stroke and you do a backstroke, and you end up kind of corkscrewing down the pool, and the kids get dizzy, and it's a lot of fun. But we can utilize that in a buoy turn. So if I've got a buoy on my right, what I can do is I can take a stroke right where that buoy is. And as I'm pulling through, I can do a backstroke. And now my arm is going to come around that buoy and then carry through it to the other side. So you're almost kind of wrapping your body in a twisting motion around that. Now, as I explain this, it sounds really complicated, and it's definitely one of those where you need to kind of get someone in the water to practice with that. I've done it at some of our camps where we have open water, where I'll bring an inflatable buoy, a little small thing, and we'll literally practice swim to it, do the backstroke around it. The big common thing is people tend to do the backstroke the wrong direction. And so if you're something you want to try, it's that stroke in, and then you're taking that arm that's going to be kind of towards, so this arm is right next to the buoy. That one goes freestyle stroke. The other one comes, and it's almost like I'm coming around and trying to hug the buoy as I come around that and kind of just come over the top. So a tricky thing, people have probably seen it done. It is something you can practice. It is something you can do. And it is fast, and it'll get you through that. Now, if you're someone that's like, that's going to make me dizzy, I don't want to be bumping into other people, I just want to get around that buoy and people leave me alone, let me get to the finish line. It does make sense for some people to stay a little bit wide of that buoy. And that's something where you can keep your swim stroke a little bit more efficient. You're not doing those short little choppy strokes to get around that, but rather if you kind of take a wider turn, you can kind of keep more of a natural stroke rhythm. And so if you're not a strong swimmer and it's just easier for you to keep moving, you can take a little bit of a wider turn, and that might be faster for you because now you're not bumping in with other people, you've got clean water, and you can make that turn around the buoy. And so there's no one way to do this. There's ways that probably are going to be faster, but again, that's going to be dependent upon who you are as a swimmer and how comfortable you are with the swimmer. So as a swimmer. So I saw some comments come in. I'm just going to take a quick peek and make sure I'm not missing anything in there.
Oh, it was just the peanut gallery chiming in here.
Commenting on my cool motions there as I went through it. All right. Okay. So that's buoy turns. It's again, like anything, it's what's going to work for you, but it's knowing what are those options, what can you practice, and what can you kind of go through with it as you get in on that. Now, there we go. We've talked about kind of the skills for in between. Let's talk about the getting in and the getting out. That's can be a big portion of triathlon. Now, these days, we don't see the big mass starts as much. We don't really need to be out there bumping elbows or finding clean water. You can get with your group, you can kind of wade in and you can get going. And that's the easiest way. You kind of come in, you've set your line, you can get in with the melee, you can spread out, find some clean water, up to you. So, but what I really want to dive into is those situations where maybe again, like I mentioned, like an Oceanside or the old course for 70.3 Main, where there could be some swell, there could be some chop coming in. And how do you navigate that surf to get out of that? And so obviously you probably have all heard of dolphin dives, and dolphin dives are essentially, as you're going through, you start swimming and it's diving under, let's say, a wave, hitting the bottom and pushing yourself up and launching out. Now, that is an effective way to get through surf. That's going to help you get through that kind of bubbling water that's coming at you. It's going to be pushing you in the wrong direction. It's obviously what surfers do when they go out to surf. They dip their boards in underneath, but it's that idea of you're diving down and pushing off the bottom, utilizing that push to kind of get that momentum back. You've also probably seen some people do dolphin dives in shallow water entry swims. Now, dolphin dives, I think, are something that is useful for surf, chop, things like that as you're getting going. I tend to find if it's a shallower water swim, if it's deep enough that you can't run anymore, meaning you're kind of up to your knees, you run into where you can, and you do that big dive, and it's about knee to waist deep, that means it's deep enough for you to take a full stroke. Even you, Chris Hughes, with your very long arms and very long body, you've got long legs. So if it's to your knees, you're still able to grab that water and pull through in that. And so I find it's easier just to get in, get swimming. Some people will struggle with the dolphin dives and almost end up being slower. It's actually slower for me. I know that. So I would say if you could take a full stroke, get in, start swimming, get sighting, find your rhythm, get into your pace and get going. Again, if there's chop, you could do a dolphin dive. And essentially when we say a dolphin dive, imagine if you're running in and you go in to dive into the water, your arms are going to come over the top like a butterfly stroke, and you're going to dive right into the water. You're going to come in, you're going to put your hands on the bottom, bring your feet up, plant those feet on the bottom, and literally just kind of try to launch yourself forward. You don't want to launch straight up. You want to launch forward at an angle, and then you come up and you can start swimming. Or you can come up, do kind of a butterfly stroke back in, depending on how deep it is. Now, one of the things I've seen happen is, if we get into a beach, that beach is descending, the water is getting deeper, and all of a sudden you'll do that dolphin dive and it's a little too deep, it's a little too high of a push, and it ends up slowing you down. So I find, again, unless there's some surf, some chop that's kind of really, going to be pushing you backwards, get in the run to the water, get swimming, get going. Now, the same thing goes for a swim exit. A lot of times you'll see someone doing these dolphin dives on the exit. Now, for the average triathlete, for most of us, when we get to the end of a swim, we're kind of tired. We're a little bit spent. So let me tell you, holding your breath, diving underwater, pushing off with a lot of energy is hard work. And me personally, and I know a lot of other people and my athletes in particular, things are a little tender when we've been swimming. And so sometimes that big push off the bottom in a dolphin dive, all of a sudden, at least, you might find your calf cramping up or something like that. And so I think the most efficient, the fastest way to get out of the water, keep swimming. Keep swimming until your hands are touching the bottom. When your fingertips start touching the bottom, then it's shallow enough for you to stand up and start running. If you stand up too soon and it's waist deep, you're just going to be wading and trudging through the water. And that's a mistake we see is people want to be done with the swim so bad, they try to stand up and walk or run before it's kind of that optimal time, and it's just going to slow you down quite a bit. And so, I've had times where I'll see people thigh deep running through the water and I'm just swimming right by them because I'm not hitting the bottom on my stroke. I can keep going. I'm going to keep that, maintaining that until, again, my fingertips start hitting the bottom. And when they do, that is certainly shallow enough for me to stand up and then run out at that point. Anything deeper than that, you're not going to be getting that quick of a run as you're going through that. So maintain that effort, maintain that speed and that rhythm as long as you can in the finish. Now, you don't want to be altering your stroke to where you're trying to pull way up here. You're following your natural swim stroke. And if I'm hitting the bottom, that puts me at about knee depth going. And at that point, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to start running out of the water. So you don't want to get out too prematurely and kind of end up wading through the water and going through, waist deep and slowing yourself way down on that. And then I guess real quick on the rare occasion that you're lucky enough to find some surf that was maybe hazard going out, could be beneficial coming in. And I won't talk about this too much because it doesn't happen too often, but there is that idea where if you can catch a wave and surf that in, go for it. Because let me tell you, I've done that a few times in a race here in Maine, and it is awesome to surf by people and just have that wave carry you into the finish. But unfortunately, we don't see those venues too often anymore where that comes into play. So the other thing that came up earlier when we were chatting was this idea of swimming with current. And most of the time we're going to be swimming down current with the current at your back. in that case, I don't think there's too much you need to change, except understand like, hey, I'm going to take advantage of this and I'm going to feel a little faster and have a little bit of a faster time. So allow that to happen and allow that to carry you, but don't rely on the current to give you a time. You still have to do the work. You still have to maintain that rhythm. You still have to swim through that. Now, where current can become an issue is if it's a cross current or you're swimming into the current. Now, a cross current becomes an issue because it's going to be pushing you away from where you want to go. And so if I'm sighting straight ahead and there's a current coming this way, I'm not going to keep sighting and aiming straight ahead. If the current's coming at me this way, I'm going to turn ever so slightly, depending on the current, into that current. And now as I swim, I'm aiming this way, but I'm actually swimming straight because that current is hitting me on the side. And so that then comes into play with sighting and body positioning. And I think it's important to understand if you do have a current, how that is going to affect you and how that's going to affect the direction you go. And I know sometimes people will say, you know, how do I know if there's a cross current? Usually in those situations, there's going to be some sort of buoy. There's going to be something that's going to give you an inclination of what the current's doing. That buoy is going to be stationary and the current's going to be wrapping around that. So you can tell by the flow of the water around a buoy, whether it's a turn buoy, if you're up here in Maine, it's a lobster buoy, could be whatever, but that you can see the current working around that buoy, and that can give you an idea of what is happening within the water in terms of current. Now, if you're swimming against current, this is obviously gonna be a pretty tough one, right? So I think of swimming against current is gonna bring your effort level up, as it should. It's also going to bring up your tempo and bring up your cadence. You need to increase your stroke rate to increase the effort to fight that current and battle through that. Now, most of the time, you're not going to be swimming up current for very long. So think of it as like a surge, if you will. So you're surging as you're facing that up current portion of a swim. But something to be aware of is you don't want to try to maintain that same rhythm or that same effort level. You're going to need to bring that up because that's putting you in harder, more difficult conditions as you go through that. So just some things to be aware of with current. And again, that is obviously one of those things where you're not going to be able to practice that in a pool that is open water specific. You're going to need to get out into a place where there is some current, or maybe you're just out doing an open water swim and you notice there is. You know, sometimes for fun, as I was talking with Tiger, if anyone was listening, we do this great swim here in Maine where we swim. It's a tide assisted marsh swim. So we see what the tide is doing and we let it push us along. But sometimes for fun, we'll say, all right, you know, we stop, we float. Hey, you know what? Let's play with this a little bit. We'll flip it around and we'll swim against the current for a couple of minutes just to kind of practice that or bring our effort level up and just play around with it. And so take advantage of those situations when you see it and play with the current in different directions and learn and practice how to do it. We get into open water swimming and we want it to be so comfortable all the time. I think within that, take advantage of those adverse conditions, whether it be a current, whether it be wind, whether it be chop. Don't just kind of wade through it to get around it. Practice getting through that, you know, and use those kind of what might seem as kind of disadvantages on the day to your advantage to practice in those situations and practice in those scenarios. And that's the best way, or sometimes the only way you're going to be able to practice a lot of these open water specific skills is in the open water. Now, to kind of flip the script a little bit, we're talking a lot about what we can do in open water and how we do that. You know, one of the things we do a lot in the pool is we do a lot of drills. And then people go in the open water and they might say, you know, I'm really used to these drills helping to establish my stroke and where I am and what I'm doing. How do I do that? Or how do I do that in the open water? You know, obviously we don't want to be using a lot of toys in the open water. From a swim run background, I'm generally okay with pull buoy or paddles, hand paddles. Generally speaking, you probably in a triathlon wetsuit, you've got enough buoyancy. You don't need a pull buoy in there, but it's something you could throw in for kind of like an added advantage. Something you don't ever want to be using in the open water is a snorkel. Very dangerous because now you're not sighting. You don't know what's going on around you. You don't know what's happening. Waves could come into that. So we're definitely staying away from the snorkel. Fins, you could utilize fins if you wanted to a little bit too. But, you know, when we talk about some drills, I think one of the easiest ones that you can do in the open water is the closed fist drill, which we do somewhat frequently. And that's that idea of just swimming with that closed fist. And it's something, you know, when we're doing open water warm-ups, and you might see them in our open water swim sessions, usually it involves something like 30 strokes smooth, 30 strokes, 70%, 30 strokes smooth, 30 strokes, 80%. On that smooth swimming, throw in that closed fist drill. And what we're trying to do with that is we're allowing that fist to drop down, and we're just trying to set up a good catch and utilizing our full paddle. Our paddle is our fingertips all the way through our elbow on our forearm. Now we're reducing that with a closed fist, but we're focusing more on that forearm portion of the paddle. Most of us, it's really easy to feel the hand part. It's not so easy to feel the forearm part. If you've got that closed fist and you go into that stroke, now you're really feeling water here to move water back. And that's a good one just to integrate into open water swimming because it's super easy to do. Close your hands and swim. And if you're not doing it correctly, and maybe you're dropping an elbow or something like that, and you're not utilizing that full paddle, you'll know it because your hand, you're just going to be slipping through the water and you're not really going to be going anywhere at all. All right, I know I ran through a lot of stuff really fast, but I know there's often quite a few questions. So I always try to leave about 20 minutes. And I think I hit that almost right on. So at this point, Chris, I know, is raising his hand. So Chris, let's start with you. Let's go for it.
Yeah, so I just maybe looking for your advice, given that you've watched me swim, so I have some advantage there. I live on a lake, but I spend a lot of time in the pool, as the purple patch methodology is. There is a drastic differential between the speed that I can maintain in a pool and in the water. And aside from the obvious, I swim as straight as an arrow. I've GPSed it. But like when I do the 1,000 TT, I'm like 118 per 100. But if you told me, like I just did an Olympic distance last weekend, swam as hard as I possibly could, and I was 130 per 100. And my yards are accurate. I swim straight. Like at this point, like, is it my wetsuit? Is it like there's something changing in water? Is my sighting really slowing me down 10 seconds per 100?
Yeah, I think, it could be a combination of a bunch of things there, right? And so we'll run through it. One, obviously, conditions. And sometimes conditions might look okay, and you'd be like, nah, that was kind of choppy. Obviously, if it's glass, and you can kind of tell. The other thing is, sighting might be an issue too. And I've used this certain set, and I think we used to use it a little more frequently in Purple Patch, but it's a set where we do something, and I think it's 8 200s. Think of it as 4 sets of 2. The odds, you're swimming just regular. The evens, you're sighting. And we'll do 2 at 70%, 2 at 80%, 2 at 90%, and 2 fast.
I think we just did it. Maybe something like that.
It didn't have the sighting aspect into it, I think, or maybe not, or it might be in a race build too. But that is a great set, because then you can really, if you are a good pacer, you've got an idea of like, okay, I'm swimming 80% right now without sighting. Now I'm swimming 80% with sighting. What's the time difference, right? If there is one. Now in a pool, it's probably going to be a little more minimal, but if you've got like a 2-3 difference in a pool, that kind of adds up, and it probably will be exacerbated a little bit more in open water. Now, the other thing within open water too is it's just that it's the same reason we're slower. Well, not the same reason, I guess. Part of the reason, we're slower in 50 meters than we are in 25 meters, because that turn is it's a rest for your shoulders. It's a 3-second rest every 15 to 18 strokes. It doesn't seem like much when you're in the pool doing it because you're really tired and it really hurts, but that is a break and it is a rest. And that's sometimes where I see the biggest kind of loss in translation between pool to open water. It's just we're not used to that. And so my guess is, Chris, if you did all your swims open water, you would see that come right up and you'd be much faster. And so that's where this time of year, I think if you can, I try to recommend people do a combination of pool and open water. And so if you've got it available, I think it's that idea of getting into open water as much as you can with some harder efforts. And so that's why we're including now, you'll see in the baseline, we have open water options for a lot of those pool swims. So try to take advantage of that. And then the other thing too, where you could see that is it does become a strength thing. Like anyone that's been into open water, especially that first open water swim of the season, we get about a minute or 2 minutes into it. And this Tiger and I were just talking, because I had so late in the year and it's bumming me out. My first open water swim was just this last weekend, but my arms were dead 2 minutes into it. I was like, man, I'm just not used to it yet. And the addition of the slight, that's great. Roka has this arms up technology. It still is a restriction on your shoulders and on your core and in that movement. And so the more open water swimming you can do, the more you're kind of building up that specific strength, as well as getting used to just your arms continuously moving for that amount of time. Now, if you can't do a lot of open water swimming to build that up, you can do my favorite thing and do the swim bands and get some of those out and kind of bust your shoulders up with those a little bit as well. But that's usually some of the scenarios. And that said, some people, it is really hard to make that that translation from pool speed to open water speed. I've had some athletes and we've had some huge successes in the pool. And then we go to open water and we're just like, it's that frustration of like, crap, like what is happening? And it's little things often where, again, it's that strength and it's that idea of getting used to that constant movement. The other thing that comes into that too is now, yes, we are constantly moving. I'm strong enough to maintain that, but form starts to fall apart because you're just not used to maintaining form for that amount of time. And so the big thing that you said to me that stood out when you asked that question was sustained effort. And so it's that idea of being able to go continuously because we don't have that wall. So it's building the strength through stretch cords or through open water swimming to have those sustained efforts. And so that's why we'll do something where I'll be like, go swim, I think it was the most recent one was something like 600s in the pool, descending in pairs, or it was like go swim for 8 minutes at a time, 2 sets of 8 minute or pairs of 8-minute swims. Those are some longer extended swims that are harder effort. And that's where you're going to see. So my thing, I would say, Chris, would be just try to get in the open water and really try to hit some of those longer sustained efforts in the training.
So the answer, you sort of answered it also, is not a sleeveless kit. I mean, that I'm like 6'5". I have a hard time finding a suit that fits my length. So I shouldn't get a sleeveless kit then, or a suit.
I mean, I've found some people that have found it to be a little bit restricting. I think, you have to have some, and I don't mean you because I've met you, Chris, but like really big, broad shoulders, right? And I know you're a big guy, but like if you've got big muscular shoulders, you're going to find some restriction on that. Looking at you, I think you've got the mobility and you've got the fit to where I don't think the sleeves are making much of a difference. And I know for some people, they might they feel a loss of grip on the water. It almost feels like sometimes when they have that wetsuit sleeve on that they're not able to feel that on the forearm as much, and it creates a little bit of a slip. I think sometimes, it almost helps you hold water a little bit better. But I wouldn't chalk that up straight to being like a sleeve or no sleeve type of situation.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, who else do we got in here? It's got questions. Okay, so we had a question around courses where you have to get out and get back in again.
Oh yeah, those are fun, right? Yeah, those are tricky, where you got to get out, do a little jaunt and get right back in. I think the big part with that is, anytime you've gotten out of a swim to go into transition, what happens? You stand up, you kind of do this, and you just kind of have that like, where am I type of moment. The blood kind of rushes through your body. You get a little bit dizzy maybe, and your heart rate goes through the roof. And so when you're getting out and doing a little run to get back in, that's exactly what's going to happen. And I think the biggest thing is you can just making sure you're ready for that, in the sense that I'm going to go hard into the beach or wherever it may be. I'm going to get up. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. I'm not going to stop and let anything happen to me. I'm not going to sprint through this because I don't want to jack my heart rate. I know my heart rate's going to go up as a result, but I want to keep moving forward. So get up, keep the feet moving, keep your wits about you. That's the hardest thing. And as you get up, focus on where you need to get back in. And that usually isn't too far away, but get up, get a focus on that and keep moving forward. And just a light movement. If you find, even if things are starting to cramp a little, just try to keep moving and keep going with that. And then carry that right in, that same pace, that same movement right into the swim. Now, as you get back in and start going, a couple of hard strokes just to get going. But once you get back in, you're going to need to allow yourself some time to settle, because again, your heart rate's gone up. You've kind of jacked things a little. So maybe take, it could be anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 minutes just to kind of settle in. Maybe bring the effort down a little bit. Maybe try to lengthen that stroke out. Reset your form and think of that as, okay, for the first minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, I'm going to bring my effort level down from, I think, let's say 85% to 75%. And I'm going to focus on good form, and I'm going to allow my heart rate to settle. Think of it as like a walk break in a way, in a run. I'm going to allow my heart rate to settle. I'm going to allow my form to come back together. Okay, I've been up, I've been down, or down, up, down. I'm finding my rhythm again. I'm finding my head is getting back into it. My heart rate's settling. Now I'm going to get back into my normal pace. So as you get back into the water, just allow yourself that little bit of time, 1, 2, 3 minutes, to bring the heart rate down, refocus on good form, good technique. Let that be the focus, because that will keep you hopefully from overdoing it as you get back in, and then settle into your rhythm after 1, 2, 3 minutes. I think the kind of mistake to be made is to get in and just start going really hard as you get back in, because your form's going to be a little bit gone, in that quick jaunt you've had along the way, you've probably lost a little bit of that feel or what it felt like. Maybe you had a great rhythm coming in. You need to reestablish that. You need to reestablish good form, good rhythm, and build back into it as you get back into the water. And again, just kind of letting everything settle a little bit, and resetting, and then go back up, build back into your race effort for that second part of that loop a little bit.
Okay. We also had one that come in previously around race pacing. So for, let's say, a 70.3 or an Ironman, we've talked in the past about, how to pace on the bike or the run, but do you have general guidelines in terms of, race takeout pace, or just how to approach those longer swims in terms of pacing yourself overall?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think, one of the things we used to and we still do, I think we'll recommend this for kind of front pack swimmers, is when we had these big mass starts, there was this idea of like, I need to get out hard because I need to find my space. I need to find where I'm most comfortable. And usually that entailed really kind of, we'll say 30 seconds of fast swimming, another 30 seconds to a minute of hard swimming, and then we're settling in because we want to separate ourselves from the fray. We want to find our own line. We want to do that. Now, in these instances, when we still do have those mass starts, that's kind of that can be a good approach, in that you just need to separate yourself from the group, find out where you are and what's going in. And so in those situations, which again, we're finding to be fewer and fewer, you're going out kind of hard. Your heart rate's going to get jacked, then you're going to settle and you're going to find your rhythm, and then you're going to kind of come back into it a little bit. Now, and then I'll pause there on that. Now let's take the other swimmers who were doing kind of this just kind of gentle entry. You seed yourself seed, you walk in off the ramp, you can start swimming. You don't need to fight for position as much. You can kind of take your time getting in and seeing where you need to go, and you're kind of getting into it. And that's going to bring us up to where those sprinters came and settled a little. What we want to do is then build into that swim a little bit. I always like to think of that first half of the swim as an opportunity to kind of build into it, find your rhythm. And I say this word all the time with open water, but rhythm really is key as you get into it. So find your rhythm, set up your technique, think about that for the first few minutes. Okay, am I doing the things I need to do? If you're someone that's gone through a swim analysis, or have had a coach, and there's certain things you need to work on, those are the things you're thinking of, and you're kind of building into that. So maybe you're starting a little bit easier. You're establishing yourself, you're finding your stroke, you're finding your rhythm, and then you're building on that. Okay, I've got my rhythm. Okay, now I'm going to start to increase that tempo. I'm going to start to accelerate through that stroke a little more and build onto it. But I like to see people build that first half of the swim, because then you're settling, you're finding your rhythm, you're setting up good technique, you're getting through the first half, and then you're maintaining that or building on that even more on the second half. So it becomes kind of a pacing mechanism to establish early, set yourself up, build into that. And we want to see you finish strong through the end of the swim. So we want to be coming into transition feeling good, working through that. Maybe not, not an all-out sprint, but that second half, we want to almost negative split it or even split it, if you will, but build that first half, setting good habits, setting good rhythm, good technique, good form, and then maintaining that hard effort through the back half of that swim. And I guess if we were to talk on percentage levels, I think that's a little dependent on who the swimmer is. Maybe a super strong swimmer is 85, 90% on a 70.3. Someone else might be closer to that 85 or maybe even 80 to start as they kind of get in and get settled. But I generally find people can swim harder than they think they can in a race.
No, that's a good point. From Corey here, he just did his first open water swim of the year, tried to do the open water swim. What's a good way to know you've done about a 30-second interval? If it's, it's almost impossible to look at the watch.
It is. Yeah, that's where it gets tricky. And, with the open water swimming, it's the same application, if you will, if we do, say, a bike workout on the road. We're giving you these workouts, we're giving you these intervals, but ultimately what it comes down to is the intent. And we're trying to follow the intent of that workout. So if you see some 30-second intervals at a hard effort, first, make sure you're maintaining that hard effort. Then I mean, you can kind of guesstimate on that 30 seconds. Something that's shorter, as short as 30 seconds or even a minute, counting strokes is a good way to go about that. And so just getting, maybe if you have a good idea of what your stroke rhythm is or what your stroke count is per 25, that could kind of give you an idea within that, and maybe what you swim at 25 in, that could give you an idea on that. So maybe, 30 seconds might be 30 strokes, or it might be 25 strokes, or it might be 40 strokes, but you have an idea. And so one way to do that is be like, I'm going to just count strokes. And if that ends up being 27 seconds or 35 seconds, that's fine. The intent is you've kind of got that amount of time at that effort is really what we're looking for. And the same thing kind of comes down to, obviously like a 2-minute interval, maybe you check your watch at the beginning, you go, and when you think it's been about 2 minutes, you can just kind of take a peek if you're able to. I know some people it's tricky, and maybe you even have to stop and look, you're like, oh, it's 1:45. You're right there in the range, and you're finding the intent. So with those open water workouts, they don't have to be exact. You're just trying to follow the intent and be kind of around what those estimates are.
All right. And then we had one from Marianne here. Do you have any just general tips in terms of open water for slower or more developing, more novice open water swimmers?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are a newer to open water swimming and you have a race coming up, the best thing you could do is just get in open water and swim, and being comfortable within the environment. So I would start with that. Get comfortable within the environment, get comfortable swimming. And so, yes, we have these open water swim workouts, which 9 times out of 10, or I would say 8 times out of 10, I would say if you're going to go swim in open water, bring a workout with you, have some intent to that workout, know what you're doing there and have a goal with it. That said, as you're newer to the sport, you don't want to go into the first open water swim you've done, or maybe even the first 5 open water swims you've done, and try to hit a workout. You just want to get in and swim and be like, oh, okay, this is what sighting is. This is working with the current. This is being aware of my surroundings. This is my shoulders getting tired after 2 minutes of swimming. It's more just getting the experience of it. And the more you can do of that, the more comfortable you're going to be. Once you've built that comfort level up, then you can start hitting some more structured workouts on that end and things like that. But I think the biggest thing you can do is just get in the open water and feel comfortable. Even on the days where you might show up and you look at it, you're like, that's looking a little bit scary. Maybe the surf is up, the chop is up. That's a good opportunity to get in. And I'm not saying go right in and jump off a pier into 30 feet of water. Maybe find a shoreline where if you do get into trouble, you can just stand up. But practicing swimming in those types of situations that scare you, because on race day, if it's scary, you want to have that confidence to know that you can handle it and dive into it in that way. So if you're new, if you haven't done a whole lot of open water swimming, the best thing you can do is more open water swimming. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get with it. And as you get more comfortable with it, then you can start adding more structure to those open water swims and hitting more intervals and things along those lines.
Awesome. We have 2 more questions that I do want to hit. But before we do, I wanted, because you had mentioned earlier in the presentation kind of around swim analysis specifically. So before we wrap up on these final ones, I just wanted you to kind of talk through, because not everybody might know exactly how that works or what it is or the benefits that it can provide. So maybe just a quick overview on that for everybody.
Absolutely. And it's great because I can see, I think maybe at least 4 people on this call that have done it with me. So it's even better to see that they're still showing up to hear what I have to say. So swim analysis is a good way to find your inefficiencies, things that you need to work on. And with that, it's not going to be, hey, here's 12 things to work on. It's going to be here's 3 things that you need to work on. And with that, what I mean is, when we go through that, you essentially sign up for swim analysis, you get someone or you yourself, film yourself swimming underwater. Underwater is the best place for me to see what's happening. I can take a look at that. You're going to upload that video into an app. I can look at it. I can overlay on top of that my voice, some diagrams, point out, here are the things, here's what I'm seeing, here's what we should be seeing. We get on a call, Zoom call, I go over it in a lot more detail, explain those things, hopefully get you to understand what we're going to be working on. And I give you some drills and some tips, send you on your way for 4 to 6 weeks, practice those things, and then we go through the process all again. And I think that's kind of what separates our swim analysis from someone else, is that we come back and we make sure you're making those changes. We make sure you're moving in the right direction, and we re-look at new video to make sure that's happening instead of just being like, here you go, good luck. We want to make sure you're implementing that stuff in the right way. And one of the things I try to do when possible too is say, okay, here's what you're doing at a pool. Here's how that might be different in open water. And here's how maybe we can apply that in open water. And I've even had some people who we will do the analysis in open water because that's where they're swimming. Now, a little bit easier in a closed pool environment, but still super helpful to it, like in that closed pool environment, to really hone in on technique and things and inefficiencies and try to make those improvements on that.
Awesome. Okay, sorry. And okay, so we've got two last questions on here. One from another that I think is a good just review for people, because I know we've had questions on this before about swimming in general, but what's the best way to determine your percent effort? So when we say 70% or 90%, what does that really mean? Does it change based on interval length and things like that?
Yeah, that gets tricky. And that's part of the reason we do prescribe in effort based, is because, I mean, at the end of the day, ideally, your 80% effort is going to be the effort you have available at 80% on that given day. Now, there's going to be some differences in this. We're going to see where this changes a little bit. But before I get into that, the reason we like to do that is because, as even Chris said, who I know had to jump, yes, I can swim 118 in a pool, and maybe that's his 90% effort is 118 in a pool, but then he goes to open water and his 90% effort is 130. That's why we prescribe in effort based, because if we describe in paces, it doesn't translate as well between pool to open water. Effort is effort at the end of the day. Now, as to what that effort is, it does take some practice and it does take some dialing in. Now, let's say if I were to tell an athlete, go do a 50 freestyle at 90% effort, that speed, that pace is going to be much, much higher than if I told an athlete to do a 500 freestyle at 90% effort. So it's relative to the distance. So if I were to look at a 500, you know, and I were to say 90% effort, it's like, what can you maintain from an effort perspective for an entire 500? And that can be a long distance for some people. So it's understanding that. Whereas a 50 is down and back. Therefore, that pace is going to be a little bit harder, but the effort should be relative to that distance. And it takes some practice. Now, I like to think of it as like easy is just easy. 70-75% is kind of that like go all day endurance type of effort, maybe like a zone 2 type effort. That 80-85% effort is maybe more equated to a zone 3 type effort. 90 is zone 4, 95 zone 4 plus, and then you've just got zone 5 max, really, really fast efforts. And it does take some practice across these. You know, you might go into, again, a longer distance. We had some 600s in the plan recently, and you might say, nope, this is my 80% for 600. And then you get to about 400 into that and realize, nope, that was not 80% at the beginning. That was too much, because now I'm dying at the end of this. And so sometimes, especially on those longer distance, you might go into it and it might feel a little bit too easy for 80%. And then it might feel a little bit too hard at the end. So we're kind of finding that balance in there. And it's not obviously an exact science. It gets tricky with 70%, particularly when someone will be like, I just did those efforts at 90% and I did those efforts at 100%, and the 100% was slower than the 90%. That's pretty frequent, and it just takes some practice. And really what we're looking for is more just a shift in gears. We just want to create those different gears and be able to shift between speeds as we kind of ramp up effort and ramp back down. And it's there's no real clear-cut answer to that, other than you're just kind of getting in and playing with it a little bit.
All right. And then last question here was from Natalia, who's doing Ironman Wisconsin. And if we'll answer this one, if you guys have additional questions specific to particular courses, you can always write in and ask us as well. But she was just asking if you had any specific sort of guidance or tips around the Ironman Wisconsin Lake Swim. I don't know if you've looked at it, but it's basically a rectangle and it's 2 loops and it is a lake.
I have not looked at it. So tough to me to say, other than, you know, when you've got a 2-loop swim like that, one of the things I like about that is you can kind of, like I said, when I mentioned earlier, breaking it up into like a half and a half, it does it for you. There you go. You've got that first half to kind of build into it, find yourself and be like, all right, I've made it through that loop. Now I'm going to maintain that effort. I'm going to bring up the effort and get going a little bit harder. Now, if you're doing a rectangle and it's the morning, undoubtedly at some point in that, unless it's cloudy, you're probably going to have the sun in your eyes. And so I think it's having an understanding of where's that sun going to be coming from and how do I adjust what I'm doing, whether it be my sighting or my breathing. That's something we didn't talk about on this call, what we have on previous calls. is bilateral breathing. And as I've said before, bilateral breathing does not mean breathing every third stroke or every fifth stroke like it might for traditional swimming. It rather means, can I breathe every stroke to my left and breathe every stroke to my right? Because if that sun, you're on one leg of that rectangular swim and that sun is right there to my left, and I usually breathe left, I'm just getting blinded every time I turn my head. I need to have that skill to then be able to breathe just to the right, so I'm not going blind every time I breathe. So having that skill in that, because again, if it's a rectangle, at some point, you're probably going to have the sun working around you in that way. And so understanding where that is and how to adapt it with that. Other than that, it's a lake swim, hopefully a little bit calmer. It might come down to whether or not it's wetsuit legal or not wetsuit legal. That's another thing that often comes into play as we talk about these swims and how to adapt that. Particularly those swims that are right on the border of being wetsuit and not wetsuit, those can be tricky. And we've got these athletes, my athletes who I coach all the time are just so comfortable swimming in a wetsuit, they don't ever want to not do it because it's easier. Then we have to have that conversation of like, what if it's not a wetsuit legal swim? You need to be able to swim in open water without it. And so if it's one of those where it's right on the border, you need to be comfortable swimming in maybe a swim skin, and you need to be comfortable swimming in a wetsuit, and understanding what the differences are and how that's going to feel between the two as well.
Awesome. Final question, most important one from Lonnie. What is your favorite post open water swim beer?
Good question. Whatever my buddy Andy has in his trunk on that day. So it's I have the benefit of swimming with a great group of guys, and one of them's got a kegerator, and he always shows up with a growler of something at the end of a swim, even if it's a 9 a.m. swim, which I'm okay with. I'll take it. But for me, maybe for a while I was into like a nice goza, but it was a little too salty with the saltwater swim. So usually like a nice, sometimes a lager. I'm an IPA guy. Honestly, you give me a beer, I'm drinking it.
All right, spoken like a true athlete. All right, folks, I think we are going to go ahead and wrap up here. For those of you, and I'll double check in case there was an issue on the purchase process, but for those of you that are interested in swim analysis, it is a fantastic option in your roadmaps. In today's plan that pop in every week, if you scroll down to the bottom, the link to the swim analysis is in there along with a $25 discount code. So this would be a good time to take advantage of that if you want to, and kind of get your swim dialed in for late season races. John, I will let you finish up with any final thoughts here overall.
Yeah. I think if anyone has any follow-up questions, or even, about anything we discussed, because again, I know I threw a lot of stuff in here, or anyone that's watching the recording of this has any questions, don't hesitate to write in and ask, and we can get back to you with some hopefully some answers on that. And again, even if you have further questions on the swim analysis, and particularly how that works and what you might need to do on your end, with anything, just let us know. We're here to answer any and all of those questions.
All right, guys, thanks so much. We'll wrap it up with that. Have a lovely evening, everybody.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.